Hi, this is Jen McFarland. We tried so hard to do a Facebook Live and we failed miserably. Technology was just not on our side, so we decided to sit down and do a Zoom that we will now record and put up on Facebook. I'm joined today by Allison Kinnear, who was the lovely guest on the third paddle. Hello.
Hello.
And we thought we would just touch base and see how you liked the episode and talk about any of the things that came up for us since recording the show. So, hey, Allison, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. We tried to get all our sillies out, and I'm not sure that we succeeded.
I don't know if we did either, but that's okay. I'm good with our sillies.
So am I. I think that the biggest thing for me that came up since recording the show, and it's interesting because I've heard you speak, like when you spoke in front of Amazon, I was in the back of the room, and so I'm familiar with a lot of the concepts. It was just the idea that that you really truly aren't alone, and that it comes up for everybody, and it doesn't just come up once, it comes up, again and again, and it's something that you have to work with on an ongoing basis. Right? Or is it just me?
No, definitely not just you. Definitely, I think it applies to all of us. There are going to be areas in our life where we feel really confident and that we can step into and not feel like an imposter. And then something can happen that can just set us back a few steps. And I know for me that came up even in the listening to the podcast, where I was hearing myself and I was like, oh my gosh, why am I cursing so much? And what exactly, I don't think you even paid attention to that question. It's like the biggest critic of all. This is the way it works. Like our biggest critic is almost always ourselves. And I know for me, this was one of those points where I had to do the work in order to continue to do my work. And part of the things that I talk to clients about is that, the rigor of the work is one thing, and your self-worth is another thing. And so we have to work hard to make sure the rigor of our work is of high quality, but we don't have to tie that in with our self-worth. So for me, when I was listening to it, I was like, well, you could have gotten your point across with just dropping one F-bomb. I don't know if you need to drop like a whole bunch of them. But so to me, that's like, okay, that's the rigor of the work, note to self. And I had to really watch myself when I was going like, oh my gosh, you sound like an idiot. Like no one's going to listen to you. You sound like a sailor. Like that was all the self-worth stuff. And I had to kind of like pull some of that back.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, though, that considering many of the episodes, almost all of them are marked explicit. That should tell you that like a lot of people swear on the show and people still listen to the show. So it's not really something that people, at least in our listenership, really are concerned with. I think they really are about the content and what kind of goes in between. Yeah. The other thing that I would share is kind of that we talked about it before we turn on the recorder, is how long of a day that we had. So we are not only professional colleagues, but we're also friends. And so you were visiting me from Seattle down here in Portland, and we had been all over town. We had been doing all kinds of things. And then we're like, oh, you were here for a podcast. Maybe we should record that. So I think we can both listen to it and recognize that there were moments that we were both a little rummy from the whole day,
we're a little rummy
and tired. And then the fact that we actually talked about like tacos and gin and tonics, and then we actually went and did that at like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night.
Yes.
Which is a little late for both of us. So, this all took place in the middle of kind of a vacation for you.
Yeah, definitely. And yet we still got great content. I feel like, talking about vulnerability and talking about imposter syndrome and talking about communication and talking about the role of women in our society now, like we were able to go deep. And it was definitely like, I remember being really tired and going, I don't know if any of this is going to work out.
And yet it always does. I think that, one of the big things that I shared on that podcast that I've not really talked about a lot is how vulnerability, I long thought of it as a weakness. And one of the things I didn't share on there is, when I first saw Brene Brown's TED Talk, I was like crying and like angry and like had all of these emotions around it. And and you gave me her new book when you came to visit, and it's still like, I still think about her talk often, and I think that one of the reasons your message really resonates with me is it really ties those things together, the idea of vulnerability and confidence, and how maybe if your confidence isn't there, you do feel a little more tender and more vulnerable, and then you may have like a reaction to people saying that that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I don't think we think about vulnerability in the workplace very often, but it's so there. And we don't think about vulnerability as it relates to confidence. And yet our willingness and our ability to navigate vulnerability helps us better access our confidence. It helps us better grow our business. Like, it helps us, I went to WordCamp Seattle this past weekend, and there was this woman she was a blogger, and she had been doing it for, I guess, 5 years, and she was giving a workshop on how to become a full-time blogger. And one question that came up from the audience was, what do you wish you knew now that from, like, right in the beginning, to help you be successful? And she thought about it for a moment and said, I wish I wasn't so afraid, especially so afraid to ask for help. And
Mm-hmm.
being afraid and asking for help puts you right in vulnerability.
Yeah.
And if we're uncomfortable being in vulnerability, then we're not going to admit that we're afraid, and we're also not going to ask for help. And so it's imperative for our businesses that we learn how to navigate our own vulnerability, so that, once again, we're not tying the rigor of the work up with our self-worth. That asking for help is part of the rigor of the work. Asking for help helps us learn new things, helps us get mentors, helps us get tools, helps us grow our business, and not confusing that with our self-worth, that asking for help means that we're a victim, that we don't know, that it's weakness. Do you know what I mean? Like, we can't,
Yeah.
that's why it's important not to confuse those two.
Well, and I think it extends beyond, it extends into all facets of your life, honestly, not just building a business. And I recognized it a lot in the workplace. And honestly, when I had done a lot of the work around vulnerability and asking for help and realizing how that was holding me back, that was actually when I knew it was time to leave my job. Like, you know what I mean? Like, when you start to grow and realize that it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay because other people don't know everything. Then you're like, wait, I can do things. And what's keeping me from doing the things that I want to do?
Yeah. Yeah, that's big. Well, and starting your own business is just one of the most vulnerable things. So, like, when you can get comfortable with it, it's like, oh, okay, other people have done this before. I mean, maybe not exactly in the same way, but other people have ventured down this road, and so why not? Like, when we can get comfortable with that vulnerability and asking for help, then we can suddenly, then so many more possibilities open up to us, when
Yeah,
before we can so easily feel trapped.
absolutely. And I think I felt a lot more trapped before I was able to open myself up to getting help. It's very lonely.
Oh, so lonely.
Lack of confidence and not realizing, all of the imposter syndrome stuff. It's very lonely because you're terrified that anybody will find out.
Yep, exactly. And then, we are our worst critics, right? And so that inner critic voice, when we are not reaching out, then we're just stuck with ourselves, and, like, not the best part of ourselves either. We're like stuck with I'm going to curse. We're stuck with our asshole side. Like, that's it. Like, it's just us and our
Excuse
inner
me, we don't
asshole.
say asshole on the Foster Growth Facebook page. No, but really we are. Continue.
But that's it. When we isolate ourselves and we're feeling so lonely, we're that's the part of us that just kind of grows and grows and grows, and, like, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's not It's not our helpful side, and it's not a pleasant side to be around. It's
Yeah, it would be the exact opposite of the pleasant side to be around, for
yes.
sure. Yeah. And then what happens is I think it can just get bigger and bigger to the point where you want to give up or you can't manage it, or you know what I mean? I mean, it just gets too big at a certain point and you just want to quit, or you get depressed or sad. And
Yep.
I think that when I talk about some of the moments where I started to realize that I was changing, it usually comes around points where I asked for help, where I realized I needed help. And then like, that's where this big growth started to happen, where the big changes in my life started to happen. And, and I do think that those are the times when you're never out of the woods with imposter syndrome, but maybe you start to get a little more out of the woods. So you don't just live there all the time.
Yes, definitely. And I think sometimes we're motivated by the pain, like the pain of asking for the longest time can feel too big. So we just stay. But then at some point, the pain of staying becomes more painful than the pain of asking for help. And usually when we ask for help, then things transform, like you're saying, for the better and eventually I think what happens is that at first you're waiting for the pain. You're waiting for the pain of not asking to get bigger. And then after a while, you're like, well, every single time I ask, like things get better. Maybe I don't have to wait for it to be like so miserably painful. And so you then start preempting it and then seeing like, oh, actually that was better. And I didn't have to go to like my deepest, darkest place in order to get the support I needed. And so that I think helps. And yeah, with imposter syndrome, I don't think you're ever fully out of the woods, but it's kind of like, there's that great poem. It's like an autobiography in 5 chapters. I think the author is Portia Nelson. And it's basically, there's a hole in the street. I walk down the street, I fall in the hole. I'm there for a long time. I don't know how to get out. Chapter 2, there's a hole in the street. I walk in the street, I fall in the hole. I feel like I've been here before. It takes me a while, but I finally get out. Chapter 3, I go down the street, I fall in the hole. I know exactly where I am. I'm able to get out. Chapter 4, I walk down the street, I walk around the hole, and I keep going. And chapter 5 is I choose a new street. Like that's basically the poem. And that's our process of change, right? And that's our process with imposter syndrome is we can easily be in it and not even know that you're in it, and it takes forever to get out. And after a while you start to realize like, oh wait, I know exactly where I'm at. I'm in imposter syndrome. Like, okay, hold on. I've got some tools. Let me see what I can do to get myself out of it. And eventually it becomes, I don't know if I'm yet at chapter 5 where I'm choosing a different street, but I definitely am aware, like in listening to the podcast, it's like, just note to self, when you watch yourself or you hear yourself, this is when your self-critic like really comes up. And so, it's like being able to like walk around that hole. And when I, should I fall in it, to be able to get myself back out. And I think that's just part of the journey.
That's really beautiful. I'm gonna have to find that book. Like I haven't read that poem before. So
yeah, I pretty much recited the whole thing, but it's a good one. I can give you the link.
Yeah, that's cool. And it reminded me of this quote that I had at my desk at my office before I left my job. And it was like kind of this knowing that I needed to move on, but like so much uncertainty, and it said, and I'm going to wreck it because I can't remember, but it's something that I think we've all kind of heard, which is like change happens when the pain of staying the same is too great, something along those lines. And I think that what you just recited is like the cousin to that, like you identify it and you're like, I don't want that pain. Like, I want to walk around that, I've been in there before,
Exactly.
And then it grows enough that you're just not going to choose that street anymore. And you're going to walk down a different path. And I will say that it surprises me that the inner critic goes for you when you see yourself, because you do have Facebook Lives every Wednesday. And you want to tell people what that's about?
Yeah. So every Wednesday night at 9:00, I go live on Facebook and I talk about, it's called Late Night Snack, because it's just a late night video and it's kind of like a little snack of a video, just about 10 minutes. And what I do is, sometimes longer, but what I do is talk about self-care, parenting, leadership, and just life. And, it can be anywhere from back to school night for the kids. It could be about ways to help your inner imposter when it flares up. And it can be about boundary setting. I mean, we've talked about friendships with adults. We've talked about, how to break off a friendship when it's no longer serving you, how to set boundaries even when it's uncomfortable. Just did one on jealousy, and how that can flare up. So it's kind of all over the map. And I try to tell a story to go along with it to kind of keep it interesting, and also incorporate some research that can be helpful in all of it.
And it's so good. So I really encourage people to go to facebook.com/voice of our own. And you can check that out. And don't forget to check out this week's podcast, which features Allison Kinnear, who's the star. And I will have the link to that in the comments so that you can be sure and go listen to that, because, well, you have to listen to it for no other reason, just because cursing. No, there's a lot more to it than that. And we really just scratched the surface today on the Facebook live video about it. So please join us on the third paddle. And thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen.
Miss Allison
You're amazing.
So thank you very much.